Our next presentation is from Leslie Mabon, who's joining us from Oban in Scotland. His presentation is entitled Urban Green Landscapes, Justice and Subtropical Asian Cities. So we're coming from one place and looking at a very different one. Dr. Leslie Mabon is a senior lecturer in social science at the Scottish Association for Marine Science in Oban. His research focuses on the social dimensions of climate change adaptation, especially nature-based approaches, and the governance of environmental change on the coasts and seas. A geographer by training, Leslie's work often involves collaboration across disciplines to better understand responses to environmental change that are both scientifically appropriate and socially acceptable. Leslie, are you ready to show us all of that now?
Absolutely, yeah. I'll just click the share screen button. Assuming you can hear me.
Your all systems go.
And you should now have this on the screen. Is that, you got everything up?
Looking good.
Okay, in that case then, thanks very much everyone. I'm on time now, so I'll get on with it. There's been a lot of interest recently in urban green landscapes and climate change adaptation, but a lot of that's focused on North America and in Europe. We've been interested in our collaboration to think about what that means for somewhere a bit different, namely Southeast Asia. And we're looking at different skill sets that might come into making this just urban green landscape. So not just distribution, but also process and recognition, looking at different skill sets. I'm going to talk today about a little bit about what each of these are and how we've seen this whole process of making the just or unjust urban green landscape. And to do this, I'm going to talk about three similar but different subtropical Asian cities, one being Fukuoka in Japan, another being Taipei in Taiwan, and a third being Hanoi in Vietnam. So for the last few years, my collaborator Wan Yu-Shi and I have been looking together at the different aspects that go into making and sustaining a green urban landscape. Why are we interested in subtropical cities? Why is this different? Well, the climate's perhaps a bit different to where a lot of the scholarship has happened so far. We've maybe got different species, different ecosystem services. This might mean that we have different issues to be addressed when it comes to thinking about fairness, equity, and justice in adapting through greenery. We also have quite different urban forms, and cities in the subtropics tend to be a bit denser. Hanoi, as you can see here, is expanding at a great rate of knots. Taipei, Fukuoka have a lot of regeneration. So, you've got potentially different issues to what we've seen in the scholarship so far. And as I say, I'm going to talk today about what some of these challenges might be. Just a little bit more in each of the cities. So Fukuoka is here, and this is a relatively affluent city, one that is quite dense, but also quite green and has a very technocratic, as I'll say, approach to urban green landscapes and their role in climate adaptation. It's incidentally also where my wife comes from. Taipei is a bit further south. Taipei is somewhere again that there's a lot of expansion, a lot of regeneration, also a very growing and expanding and proactive community centered around landscape architecture who are starting to turn their attention more to climate change and adaptation. And there's a whole community of practice there. And Hanoi, lastly, is difficult to characterize in an image because there's so many different phases to its development, but I've put this one up from the Botanical Gardens because it summarizes what I was told once quite nicely. A lot of Hanoi's green space is water. It looks like quite a green city, but a lot of that is sort of water bodies that are not necessarily accessible to people. So we've got three different cities and contexts. And I'll say a bit first about policies and plans. So across all of these cities, you've got pretty rigorous plans for how you can deploy green space to soak up rainwater, to mitigate heat. This is Fukuoka City's climate adaptation plan. They've got a really scary technical diagram on the right there of how they're going to cool the city with strategic greening. But, plans, policies, and things are great. Turning those into actual concrete action is quite difficult. And across all the cities we've worked in, we've seen the sort of rhetoric of equity through plans for green space, but actually getting that to work in practice, getting buy-in for that is proving quite challenging. There's also issues, and this maybe goes back to something we saw in the previous talks about distribution and about how you work with different sectors. So this is Fukuoka, and these are some of the small scale collaborative initiatives that they have in the city. Maybe can't see very well there, but they're all concentrated right in the wealthiest bits of Fukuoka, right in the center. And this orange circle here, this is a new regeneration initiative. It's called the Tenjin Big Bang. And all the investment, all the kind of developer power is gone into this kilometer radius circle. So there's an issue there. How do you spread the benefits of greening equitably across the city? How do you keep that developer power in check? Third area we looked at is around knowledge and skills, and what are the technical knowledges for enacting adaptation fairly through greening. And we actually found again that there's pretty good techno-scientific knowledge across all the cases. The issue again is getting that knowledge in the right place, getting the people who have those skills to have their knowledge recognized. But as well about participation. I'm going to pick on Taipei here because it's a very interesting example. Taiwan, much more widely, has got this big turn towards citizen participation, and that affects the way in which greening happens within the city too. They've got a lot of urban farming initiatives, neighborhood-led regeneration efforts, a lot of things that are going on. And what we found is that when it comes to bringing civil society into just urban green landscapes, that very much depends on the city context. And the real challenge is not just participation, but meaningful participation that actually, engages substantively with issues of justice and not just kind of beautification and some of the end products. Lastly, as well, considering explicitly normative and ethical issues is in some contexts challenging. So in Fukuoka, I talked to some volunteers on climate change, and they recoiled at the idea that you would even talk openly about inequality, about deprivation. That was something to be hidden. It was a kind of cultural barrier. So again, that's quite context dependent. So what can we do in response? Well, one of the things we saw that's important is individuals and institutions who can work across boundaries, who can link different bits of governments, who can link the private sector, NGOs with local governments and do that kind of boundary spanning work. That's something that was really critical to actually attaining justice in practice. Second is, again, and this is really hard, is keeping the power of the private sector and developers in check. We saw, especially in Hanoi, the private sector is really key in building new green space. But when that's done for profit, when you start to bring financialization in, you can then question whether that has been done for the benefit of the people who would benefit the most from greening. And lastly is just remembering that the landscapes, ecosystems are very different to what we might find in North America or Europe. Bringing in best practices from elsewhere is something that needs to be done with extreme caution. What works in one place might not work somewhere else. There's a great degree of context specificity. So I will just wrap up there. I've put some contact details at the bottom of the slide. This is work that's been ongoing for a couple of years and is in progress. We're just trying to now tease out some of the justice aspects. What does it mean to make and develop an urban green landscape that is just when it comes to adapting to climate change? So I'm at time and I'll stop there and thank you for your attention.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Leslie. Very interesting resonances emerging here between these presentations. I think very much between care and participation, it's not possible to separate those from notions also of justice and of practice. So I will definitely come back to those ideas in the discussion. There is a point of a point of clarification here from Jason Harrison, who says, does green gentrification tend to enclose land that was previously accessible? I'm realizing this might be different in all three situations that you're looking at as well.
Yes, that's a really good question. And again, I guess it can take different forms. One of the ways in which green gentrification can happen is around things that are improvements in the name of greening for traditionally aesthetic benefits, increasing rents and house prices and forcing people out of the neighbourhoods. What we're starting to see a bit more now, there's some really exciting work that's been done by a lot of colleagues in Barcelona on this, is around what happens when you are greening the urban environment in the name of reducing climate risk. And so again, that can have financial effects. It doesn't necessarily mean the land is enclosed, but it can mean that pricing and ability to live there is changed or is removed in ways that it wasn't previously.
Fascinating. And let's see. Oh, there's a few questions coming in. Vanessa Castambroto writes, how is justice in climate? You know what, this might be a question we'll save for later, if that's okay.
That's absolutely fine. Indeed, I would appreciate that, because it's a really good question, and I'll take a couple of minutes to
yeah. I think that
would be an answer. Very good
that's
question.
worth thinking on. So we'll just leave those questions there and return to them. I think they're very, very good questions. Thank you so much, Leslie.